Personal finance does not have to be that complicated. I mean, realistically, everything most of us are actually going to need to know to build a successful financial life can probably fit on a single index card. That's the basic premise behind the book, The Index Card, Why Personal Finance Doesn't Have to Be Complicated, by Helaine Olen and Pollack. Today I'm going to be going over what they put on their index card for the book and the reasoning behind why those things were chosen. Let's get started. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a link to the investing platform M1 Finance. Get started investing for free today. The first tip that was introduced in the book is to save 10 to 20% of your gross income. Achieving this level of savings is not always easy at first, but it is usually possible if you use a few strategies to get yourself started. The most important of these strategies may seem a little odd, especially to those who have read any of David Bach's books, but don't sweat the small stuff. Yes, it is mathematically true that saving $5 or $10 a day and investing it in an index fund like the S&P 500 could and has historically earned you a pretty substantial retirement fund. And it's pretty awesome that that can actually be the case. And it may well prove true in the future as well, but there's no getting around the fact that if we can better control our major expenses, such as housing, transportation, debt, not overspending on food, and so on and so forth, we wouldn't have to worry nearly as much about the occasional latte. So that's not a shot at David Bach or his ideas. They are true. We just might do better to focus on the few big things as opposed to all of the small stuff. Let's put some numbers behind this idea. According to apartmentlist.com, the median rent in San Francisco is about $2,500 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. The median cost for a two-bedroom apartment will go a little north of $3,100 a month. Utilities can run from $100 to $200 a month or more depending on the size of the place and whether or not you're including internet in those calculations. And according to data from numbeo.com, the average cost of basic utilities in San Francisco is about $135 a month. Internet runs an additional $65, so I'll call it $200 a month for the purposes of this video. If you rented that one-bedroom apartment, you'd be paying $2,500 a month in rent and close to $200 in utilities for a total cost of $2,700 a month. If you found yourself a roommate and rented the two-bedroom apartment instead, while splitting the rental and utility costs, your portion of those housing expenses would drop to about $1,650 a month. That equates to saving over $1,000 a month. How many lattes would that buy you? The same idea works on other major line items in the budget, such as transportation. Carpooling, public transport, and walking or biking to work on occasion, or even regularly, may all be options for you depending on your situation. Debt also falls under this category, and especially high-interest debt like credit cards. But I think you get the idea, so I'll move on. If you've gone through all your major line items and optimized them as much as you reasonably can, and that's still not enough, then you may need to turn to optimizing the rest of your budget. Because budgets can be very effective in helping you to save money. They help us monitor our spending, and as the old saying goes, we manage what we monitor. And it is entirely possible to spend $5 or $10 a day on those random small purchases without realizing it. So like I said, it's not going to make as big of a difference as optimizing the major line items in our budget will, but if you've already covered the major things and it hasn't quite gotten your head above water, an extra $5 or $10 a day may be enough to bridge the rest of that gap. In the meantime, you could also focus on raising your income, either through picking up another job, working more hours at your current one, or starting a side hustle to get your head above water and start saving money. Any of those are great options. But once you find a way to save the money, however it's achieved, where should that money go? The first place, according to the authors, is usually an emergency fund. This is crucial because life happens to all of us, and we never know when a disaster is going to strike. If we're not prepared for it, a sudden misfortune could wipe out everything we've managed to accomplish between now and then, while sending us into more debt that we'll then have to work our way out of over time. Which brings me to debt. Because outside of an emergency fund, debt is probably the other place that savings should be going, especially if you're carrying debts with those high interest rates like credit cards. The authors recommend paying off debts using the debt avalanche method because paying off something like a credit card may just be the best investment you'll ever make. Although they do note that, as many studies have found, people who use the debt snowball method are actually more likely to succeed in getting rid of all their debt than those who use the avalanche method. Which is not to say that the snowball method is objectively better, it all depends on you. So it's important to know yourself and pick which strategy is most likely to get you fully out of debt. But whichever method you choose to go with, think about all the benefits you get from paying off debts like a credit card. There's usually a high interest rate attached to them, which represents a form of guaranteed return on investment, but there's benefits beyond that as well. First, as I've covered in previous videos, once your debts are paid off, you can use the money that you were previously using to make minimum payments on those debts and put that towards your investments. Second, assuming you haven't already maxed out all your tax-advantaged accounts for this year, this additional cash that you're putting towards your investments as a result of no longer having any minimum payments on debts to make can have the added benefit of further lowering your tax bill. And possibly third, you may find yourself spending less, particularly on impulse items if you aren't using your credit card as much as before. This one is, of course, not going to apply to everybody, but there have been many studies that have shown that many of us will tend to spend more over time using credit and debit cards than we will if we had paid in cold, hard cash. So I say this is a possible benefit because it will depend on whether or not you use your credit card less during or after getting out of debt, and whether or not you see much of an effect from this phenomenon personally. But just as an example, let's say that John and Jane are each carrying $5,000 in debt on credit cards, which is charging them 18% interest and has minimum monthly payments of $100. They each have $400 a month left over after expenses and minimum payments to work with. They can either invest that $400 a month and try to earn a higher return than what the credit cards are charging them, which is unlikely over the long term, but hey, some years the markets do better than that. Or they can choose to pay off that debt and then start investing. If John were to invest the money and just make the minimum payments on his credit card, it would take him about 90 months to get that thing paid off, assuming his minimum payment stayed at $100 a month. If Jane put all $400 towards getting her credit card paid off as fast as possible, she would wipe it out in about 11 months. So that's what we'll have them do for the sake of this example. Let's look at the two hypotheticals here. In our first scenario, let's assume that John and Jane's investments earn an average of 8% per year during the 90 months that John is taking to pay off his credit card. Then, just for the sake of it, let's throw in a second scenario that shows John and Jane doing really well for themselves and earning 20% per year on their investments during those 90 months, just to see if there's any major differences if they somehow do manage to earn more than they were paying in interest on the credit card. In the first scenario, where John earned 8% and made only minimum payments on his credit card, his investments would have been worth about $49,000 at the end of 90 months. However, you'll remember Jane paid off the credit card as quickly as possible and then invested the full $500 a month, her original $400 plus the $100 she no longer has to pay on the credit card debt, after that towards her investments. And she'll end with a net worth of about $51,900, or almost $3,000 more than John after 90 months. In our second scenario, where John earns 20% on his investments and just pays the minimum on his credit card, he would have a net worth of approximately $78,100. Jane's net worth would be about $77,700. However, over the course of those 79 months that Jane was investing $500 a month after paying off her credit card, she would have invested $39,500 of her own money. Compare that to the $36,000 that John would have put away at $400 a month over the course of those 90 months if he had only made minimum payments on his credit card. As we said, assuming Jane hasn't already maxed out her tax-advantaged investments, which assuming she only had $400 or $500 a month to work with, depending on the time period, she wouldn't have actually maxed out all her options, she could end up reaping additional savings through a lower tax bill. Assuming she was in a 22% tax bracket, her additional $3,500 of out-of-pocket investments would have saved her $770 in taxes over and above what John would have already saved with his strategy. Assuming she invested this tax savings, it would actually put Jane ahead of John in the end. And that's without assuming any additional benefits for either of them in terms of not spending as much money by foregoing plastic, or even not spending as much in medical bills possibly over the years because you're leading a less stressful life with the debt being paid off. So you can see why paying off debt, especially high interest debt, can be possibly the best investment you'll ever make. But as far as where you should be putting your investments beyond debt, the authors keep it pretty simple. Never trade individual stocks, because study after study after study has shown that the vast, vast majority of us are not really that good at picking stocks. We're not the next Warren Buffett, and we don't want to fall victim to the behavior gap if we can avoid it. For more information on that, you can check out my video on 3 common investing traps to avoid at the link in the description. So instead of trading individual stocks, the authors recommend you put your money into index funds that are housed within your tax-advantaged accounts, if at all possible. The reason for using tax-advantaged accounts is simple. They give you an additional savings on your tax bill, either now or later, depending on whether or not you're using a Roth account. And both account types don't have to pay taxes on gains or dividends while you're working. What's more, some employers match part of your investment into your 401k, which is another added perk that ordinary investments in taxable accounts don't have. To show you how important this is, let's say you invested $500 a month in an index fund that paid a 2% dividend each year and saw its share price appreciate by about 8% per year. That would be a total return of about 10% per year and is roughly in line with what Vanguard's index funds have done historically. Dividends are usually taxed at your ordinary income tax rate, which for this example we'll say is 22%. Assuming you didn't use tax-advantaged accounts, over the course of a 40-year working career, you would have paid over $130,000 in taxes on your dividends alone. If you sold any shares of your investment at any point for any reason, that number would be even higher. But if you had those same investments held in a tax-advantaged account, you wouldn't have paid taxes on any of those dividends. So now we've gone over how the authors view saving money, managing debt, and investing. What's next? Well, they do spend a good amount of time discussing how to find the right financial advisor. They discuss the fiduciary standard and the suitability standard that financial advisors have to follow. The fiduciary standard, for those who don't know, requires advisors to put clients' interests above their own. Among other things, this prohibits advisors from making trades that may result in higher commissions for themselves or their investment firms if it isn't truly in the best interest of the client, or in other words, you and me. The suitability standard requires that a broker makes recommendations that are suitable based on the client's personal situation, but the standard does not require the advice to be in the client's best interest, and that is a huge difference. Obviously, having an advisor who commits, possibly even in writing, to the fiduciary standard for all dealings with you is the best option. But believe it or not, many advisors aren't legally required to follow the fiduciary standard. This is why articles on questions to ask your advisor exist, but I'm probably going to do a video on that in the future, so I'll cover that topic in more depth in that video. The next item the book covers is home buying. The authors recommend buying a home for the right reasons, and as the crash of 2008 taught us, a home is not always the best investment. They also recommend only buying when you're financially ready. This means that you should have saved up as close to a 20% down payment as you can, only go for 15 and 30-year fixed-rate mortgages, and ensure that your emergency fund is fully funded and that your debt situation is under control before buying a home. If you want more information on how much home you can afford to buy, you can check out my video on how to buy a home without going broke, which goes over the major various rules of thumb that are used to figure out how much home you can comfortably afford. I'll leave a link to that video in the description below as well. The last topic from the book we'll be discussing today is the importance of insurance. It's great if we're able to get our financial life in order, start saving money for a rainy day, pay off our debts, and start building our retirement portfolio, but it'll all be for naught if we don't have insurance for some gigantic expense that we incur, like a major surgery or hospital stay, a disability, a home fire, or even our untimely deaths. The main types of insurance that are recommended in the book are term life insurance, disability insurance, home and auto insurance, obviously, and of course, health insurance. The reason for each of these are simple. If you have someone depending on your income to put food on the table and keep a roof over your head, you need life insurance. And term life insurance is usually more affordable than whole life policies, but I'll get into that in a future video, I'm sure, as well. Disability insurance will help protect at least some of your standard of living if something were to happen to you that causes you to be unable to work and earn a living anymore. They usually don't cover your entire income, but if you should find yourself in that situation, any help from an insurance policy will be better than no help at all. Home and auto policies are there to protect us in case we get into an accident or lose our home and have to find somewhere else to live. And since our homes are often a significant chunk of our net worth, the median price of a home in the United States is over $230,000 at the time of this writing. It's definitely important to make sure we're protected if we should suddenly lose it. And I don't think I even need to go into why health insurance is important. Yes, it is expensive, but I think we all know how expensive major medical procedures can be as well. It's not uncommon for major operations or hospital stays to run into the tens of thousands of dollars. And even if you've done really well with your budgeting, saving, and investing, one major operation can easily wipe out most or all of that work if you don't have any insurance. So those are the main types of insurance they recommend. They're there to protect your dependents, your income, your major possessions, and of course, yourself. And they are not to be overlooked. So those were some major ideas that I got from The Index Card by Helaine, Olen, and Harold Pollack. Pretty simple stuff, but still very effective. Save 10 to 20% of your gross income, pay off your high-interest debts before they cripple you, take advantage of tax-advantaged accounts as much as you can, make sure your advisor commits to the fiduciary standard in all their dealings with you, only buy a home when you're financially ready, and always carry proper insurance. What did you think of these ideas? Let me know in the comments section below. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.